The War That Never Ends. April 30th, 1974. Three Hells Angels walk into what they believe is a drug deal in Florida. They never walk out. Their bodies dumped in an Everglades quarry ignite a war that still claims lives today. 50 years, 3 continents, hundreds dead. 2 motorcycle clubs locked in the bloodiest rivalry in criminal history, the Outlaws versus the Hells Angels. A feud so vicious it makes cartel violence look almost civilized. Car bombs in parking lots, executions at gas stations, massacres at public events. This is not random gang violence. It is organized warfare between criminal empires that refuse to die. The origins trace back to Illinois in 1935. The Great Depression has America in a chokehold. In the industrial wasteland of Mattook, a new force is born. The Outlaws Motorcycle Club rises from desperation, forged by men who lost everything but their pride and their machines. These are not weekend bikers in costume. These are true outlaws, 1%ers who reject society's rules and create their own. The skull and crossed pistons become their banner. Worn by riders who see themselves as soldiers in a war against conformity, by the 1950s they've carved out an empire from the Midwest to the Southeast. Florida becomes their stronghold, a sun-drenched kingdom built on speed, violence, and absolute loyalty to the Brotherhood. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, another legend takes shape. California, 1948. World War II veterans return home with more than ribbons. They bring combat training, weapons knowledge, and a thirst for adrenaline civilian life cannot satisfy. Out of this chaos, the Hells Angels emerge, rising like a phoenix of rebellion. Their winged death's head, stolen from military squadron insignia, becomes their mark. They don't just want to ride, they want to dominate. And dominate they do, spreading across California before setting their sights on the world. 2 unstoppable forces, both claiming the same crown, supremacy in the outlaw motorcycle world. At first, geography kept them apart, but as both expanded, their collision became inevitable. When they finally clashed, the underworld would never be the same. The point of no return came on New Year's Eve, 1973. A party at the Hells Angels New York clubhouse should have been a celebration. Instead, it lit the fuse of war. 3 visiting outlaws from Florida expected hospitality. What they got was a brutal beating, an assault not just on 3 men, but on the honor of their club. In this world, honor debts are paid only in blood. South Florida Outlaws leader James Big Jim Nolan's fury was cold and deliberate. His retaliation would not be a bar fight, it would be an execution that announced the Outlaws as deadly players. On April 27, 1974, 3 Hells Angels from Lowell, Massachusetts, George Whiskey Hartman, Edwin Riverboat Riley, and Albert Oski Simmons, were lured to Fort Lauderdale with promises of money and connections. Instead, they were driven to a remote Everglades quarry. Bullets ended the deal. Their bodies were dumped in the flooded pit. The message was clear. The Outlaws feared no one, not even the Angels. When Angels leader Ralph "Sonny" Barger heard the news, he responded with the coldness of a general. At a national meeting in Cleveland later that year, he declared total war. No mercy, no negotiations, only blood. The Florida executions unleashed a storm. Both clubs dropped the pretense of being mere motorcycle enthusiasts. They became armed criminal armies. Outlaw clubhouses were fortified with cinderblock walls and gun ports. Members trained with military tactics. The Hells Angels responded with coordinated assaults, machine gun attacks on outlaw clubhouses across multiple states from Georgia to Ohio. This was not limited to clubhouses. Members became targets anywhere. Gas stations turned into ambush sites. Families became collateral damage. Car bombs became the weapon of choice. silent death waiting weeks before detonation. Drive-by shootings transformed quiet suburbs into war zones. Members lived in constant paranoia, scanning every corner for enemies. By the 1980s, the body count rose like a scoreboard of death. Each killing demanded revenge. Each revenge killing demanded more. The war became perpetual motion, and as the clubs expanded internationally, the violence spread like wildfire. Canada became the first battlefield beyond U.S. borders. The Outlaws, through alliances like Satan's Choice, gained control of drug pipelines. The Angels countered by absorbing Quebec's Popeyes, seizing Montreal's underworld. What began as an American feud became a global conflict. Both sides evolved into criminal armies using intelligence networks, counter-surveillance, coded communications, and military precision. Undercover officers were hunted, police radios monitored, safe houses bug-swept. Murder became science. Car bombs were engineered with precision, and assassins like Eve Apache Trudeau turned killing into an art. London, 1998. The Battersea Arts Centre hosts the Rockers' Reunion, a celebration of British biker culture. Instead, it becomes a battlefield. 40 Hells Angels storm the event, armed with axes, hammers, machetes, and radios for coordination. Their target, the Outcasts MC, allies of the Outlaws. What followed was not a fight, but a slaughter. David Flipper Armstrong was beaten to death in the street, his body destroyed before horrified civilians. The war that began with a betrayal in New York and a quarry in Florida had now become global. It was no longer a feud, it was organized warfare between two empires that refused to die. Malcolm Street Clare suffered 8 stab wounds before bleeding to death outside the Lavender Hill police station, his life slipping away on the public pavement. Dozens more were injured, some critically, in violence witnesses described as a coordinated execution meant to send an unmistakable message about Hell's Angels' dominance. The bloodshed shattered the illusion that America's biker war was confined to its own borders. The rivalry had crossed the Atlantic, capable of erupting anywhere with deadly consequences. British authorities responded with heightened surveillance and stricter laws, but the damage was done. The world now understood that the Outlaws' Hells Angels conflict recognized no borders and spared no bystanders. Empire of fear. By the dawn of the new millennium, both clubs had transformed from regional gangs into global criminal empires. Their rivalry spanned continents and threatened international security. The Hells Angels expanded aggressively across Europe, absorbing local clubs in Germany, Denmark, Sweden, and the Netherlands, tightening their grip on the continent's drug routes. The Outlaws countered by strengthening their presence in Belgium, England, and Scandinavia. Each new chapter opened another flashpoint where old American hatred could ignite fresh European violence. In Germany, both sides ran large-scale cocaine and methamphetamine operations worth millions. Ports became battlegrounds, and cities were carved into territories defended like medieval kingdoms. In Scandinavia, the violence became so severe that Denmark introduced some of Europe's harshest anti-gang laws, including bans on clubhouses in urban areas. The conflict also spread to Australia, where firebombings and drive-by shootings forced the creation of specialized anti-bikie task forces. Yet despite new laws and police crackdowns, the violence only escalated. Law enforcement agencies worldwide were now forced to share intelligence and cooperate against a feud they had no role in creating. Hunting the hunters, the global reach of the Angels and Outlaws forced authorities to rethink organized crime investigations. In the U.S., Operation Black Biscuit became the ATF's most ambitious infiltration of the Hells Angels. Undercover agents spent months posing as bikers, gaining unprecedented access. The operation exposed drug trafficking, weapons dealing, and brutal enforcement methods, but it also revealed the extreme risks of deep cover against an organization trained to detect and eliminate threats. Legal challenges around entrapment and contaminated evidence caused several cases to collapse, teaching law enforcement that old tactics weren't enough against such sophisticated networks. The Outlaws faced their own federal pressure through Operation Motorhead, which seized huge quantities of drugs, weapons, and cash. But for every chapter shut down, another emerged. In Canada, federal and local police created integrated biker enforcement units to focus on both clubs. In Europe, joint task forces under Europol coordinated cross-border raids and surveillance. Still, both organizations proved remarkably resilient, constantly adapting and surviving. War in the digital age. The 21st century introduced new tools for an old war. Large public battles became rarer, but targeted violence continued. Knife attacks in the UK, drive-by shootings in Australia, brutal assaults tied to drug routes and territory. Federal agencies in the US still classify both clubs as major criminal enterprises involved in meth, weapons trafficking, and violent intimidation. The rivalry shifted from street-level wars to controlling international drug and arms pipelines. Law enforcement countered with advanced surveillance, phone interception, financial tracking, and asset forfeiture to cripple the club's infrastructure. Yet both groups continued to recruit new members, drawn by the outlaw mythology, the brotherhood, and the infamous rivalry itself. Symbols of eternal war. At the heart of the conflict lies something deeper than territory or money: identity. For the Outlaws, mottos like "God forgives, outlaws don't," and "Adios, angels die in outlaw states" are more than slogans. They are vows of eternal vengeance. For the Hells Angels, "Angels forever, forever angels," and "When we do wrong, nobody forgets," serve as promises of unbreakable loyalty. These words live on patches, tattoos, graffiti, even gravestones. Clubhouses become shrines decorated with spoils of past battles. Rival patches, newspaper clippings, spent shell casings. Legends of massacres and executions are retold like scripture, ensuring new recruits inherit the war as part of their very identity. The curse that cannot die. Nearly 50 years after the Everglades executions, the rivalry continues, fueled by loyalty, vengeance, and a mythology stronger than death. Hatred has become hereditary, passed down like a family heirloom. Territory remains sacred, and losing ground is unthinkable. Books, films, and news coverage have turned the feud into legend. Recruits are not just joining clubs, they are stepping into a saga written in blood. The war sustains the identity, and the identity sustains the war, locking both clubs in a cycle without end. Blood that never dries, from Florida's swamps to London's streets, from Canada's borders to Australia's suburbs. The Hells Angels and Outlaws have painted 5 decades of history in blood across 3 continents. Law enforcement has spent billions, but both groups endure, adapt, and attract new soldiers to the cause. This is more than organized crime. It is proof that hatred can be institutionalized, that loyalty can outlast leadership, and that violence can become legend. The patches still fly. The blood still flows. Somewhere tonight, new recruits are being told the stories that will drive them to kill or die for a feud they inherited but never created. What began with a New Year's Eve beating has become America's bloodiest rivalry, an eternal war written in violence that shows no sign of ever ending.